Oprah Winfrey sat composedly in the crowded courtroom, her calm demeanor masking the tension coursing beneath the surface. The courtroom, typically reserved for the most routine of civil disputes, buzzed with reporters and legal scholars eager to witness what many had already dubbed the trial of the year. On the bench, Judge Judy adjusted her glasses and scanned the courtroom, her piercing gaze landing squarely on Winfrey. "Ms. Winfrey," she began, her tone a mixture of skepticism and challenge, "you understand that the courtroom is not your stage, correct?" The statement was laced with the razor-sharp sarcasm that had made Judge Judy a household name. The packed courtroom fell into an expectant silence. Oprah's lips curved slightly, not in a smile but in acknowledgement. She had spent decades mastering the art of poise under pressure, but this moment was different. Today, she wasn't the interviewer, she was the advocate, fighting for her own integrity and the principles she held dear. Clad in a tailored navy suit that seemed to echo her resolute spirit, she rose, each step towards the lectern, deliberate, almost ceremonial. "Your Honor," she began, her voice resonant and measured, "the truth does not shrink from scrutiny. It demands it." A collective murmur swept the gallery, but Judge Judy's expression remained impassive. She had seen countless litigants attempt to charm or manipulate the court, and she would not be swayed by celebrity alone. "Then you will have your chance, Ms. Winfrey," she said, leaning back in her chair. "Proceed." As Oprah began to speak, she anchored her words in the core values of the First Amendment and the principles of journalistic integrity. She did not flinch as she detailed her years of research and the careful steps she had taken to ensure that her statements had been grounded in fact, not rumor. Each phrase she delivered was precise, each citation of precedent deliberate. Judge Judy listened intently, her eyes narrowing as she measured Oprah's arguments against the weight of legal tradition. In that charged space, the clash of personalities, two powerful women in pursuit of truth, transcended the courtroom walls. It became a moment of national significance where the courtroom transformed from a stage of accusation to an arena of ideas, and where Oprah's quiet strength began to turn the tide of perception. The second day of the trial began with a different kind of anticipation. The previous day's proceedings had captivated not just the courtroom, but the nation. And as Oprah entered, the room was already charged with a sense of expectancy. She paused for a brief moment at the entrance, taking in the sea of faces. Reporters with notepads poised, law students craning to catch every word, and members of the public who had waited in line for hours to witness the battle of wits between these two formidable women. Judge Judy wasted no time in resuming her interrogation. "Ms. Winfrey," she began, her voice as crisp as the starched collar of her robe, "yesterday you spoke eloquently about the principles of the First Amendment, but today I want you to address the heart of the matter, your intent. Did you knowingly spread false information to damage the reputation of the plaintiff?" Her tone was direct, her words sharp. Oprah met the challenge head-on. She stood, her posture unwavering, her voice calm and resolute. "Your Honor, I have always believed that truth has a power all its own. The statements I made were the product of rigorous research and careful vetting. There was no intent to deceive, no malice to destroy, only a commitment to ensure that voices long silenced could finally be heard." The words hung in the air, a quiet defiance that resonated beyond the oak-paneled walls. Judge Judy arched an eyebrow, clearly measuring the weight of Oprah's convictions. "Very well," she said slowly. "Then let us see if the evidence supports that claim." What followed was a parade of exhibits and testimony, each piece adding nuance and complexity to the narrative. Emails, reports, and sworn statements were scrutinized as Judge Judy's gavel marked each transition. Through it all, Oprah remained a study in composure, never flinching as each piece of evidence was brought forward. Observers noted how seamlessly she wove the story of her investigation into the larger narrative of accountability and responsibility. She did not plead innocence by ignorance. Instead, she owned every word she had spoken, every decision she had made. The courtroom, once skeptical of her presence, now leaned in, captivated by the depth of her argument and the authenticity of her voice. As the day drew to a close, the sense of a shifting tide was unmistakable. The trial was no longer just about a celebrity facing legal trouble. It had become a battle over the very meaning of truth in the public sphere, and in that battle, Oprah was proving herself to be a worthy combatant. The morning of the third day dawned with a hushed intensity in the air. As the courtroom filled once more, it was clear that this was no longer simply a matter of celebrity gossip or headline drama. It had become a crucible for questions about power, truth, and the rights of those who dare to speak out. Oprah Winfrey sat at the defense table, her notes neatly stacked, her gaze steady and contemplative. She was not alone in her resolve. The room itself seemed to lean in, waiting to see what would happen next. Judge Judy entered with her usual brisk efficiency, her black robe swirling around her as she took her seat. She wasted no time. "Ms. Winfrey," she said, her tone sharper today, "yesterday you spoke of intent. Today I want to hear about evidence. Show me not just your passion, but your proof." Oprah rose, her hands steady as she opened a thick binder filled with pages of research and witness statements. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and unwavering, "these are the voices of those who were silenced, workers who labored under dangerous conditions, families whose lives were upended by corporate greed. My statements were not made lightly. They were based on the words and experiences of real people whose stories demand to be heard." One by one, she presented affidavits and testimonies. A mother who had lost her job after speaking out. A factory foreman who described safety violations in harrowing detail. A young journalist who had risked his own career to uncover the truth. As each piece of evidence was read into the record, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. It was no longer just a legal proceeding, it was a reckoning. Judge Judy leaned forward, her eyes intent as she listened. "These are serious allegations," she said, "but are they enough to meet the burden of proof required under the law?" Oprah met her gaze directly. "I understand the stakes, Your Honor. That's why every fact has been checked, every source verified. The truth is not always convenient, but it is always necessary." The courtroom fell silent. Even the court reporter seemed to pause, the soft click of her keys slowing as she took in the gravity of the moment. In that silence, something shifted. Respect. Oprah Winfrey was no longer simply a public figure defending her name. She was a woman demanding that the truth, in all its raw and sometimes uncomfortable reality, be acknowledged and upheld. As the day ended, observers left the courthouse with a sense that they had witnessed something profound, not just a trial, but a testament to the enduring power of voice and conviction. The courtroom was a living testament to the unfolding drama. Each morning, the lines outside grew longer, the hushed whispers of anticipation thicker in the air. For Oprah Winfrey, this was no longer just about defending her name. It was about something far greater. The right to speak, to question, to challenge. Judge Judy Sheindlin, ever the skeptic, watched closely, her gavel ready to command order at the slightest provocation. On this day, Oprah began by calling an expert witness, a respected historian who had documented the struggles of workers and whistleblowers throughout American history. His testimony painted a vivid picture of the price paid by those who dare to confront the powerful. "The truth," he said, "is not always welcome, but it is always needed." The courtroom listened in rapt attention, the weight of the words pressing into the worn wood of the benches. Judge Judy, ever thorough, challenged the witness with pointed questions. "Is it your assertion that Ms. Winfrey's statements meet the rigorous standard required by law?" she demanded. The historian's reply was measured, calm. "Based on the evidence, yes, Your Honor. Her reporting was diligent, her sources credible." The day was marked by a steady rhythm of testimony and cross-examination. Oprah, unwavering, guided each witness with quiet determination. She wove together a tapestry of voices: factory workers, safety inspectors, labor lawyers, all offering pieces of a larger truth. The courtroom, once skeptical of her role, had begun to see her not as a celebrity but as a seeker of justice. As the sun dipped low in the sky and the final witness stepped down, the air was thick with the sense of a turning point. Judge Judy's gaze was steady, but there was a glimmer of something else now: respect. She saw in Oprah not just a defendant, but an advocate who had earned her place in this most hallowed of legal arenas. When court adjourned for the day, the crowd filed out in thoughtful silence. Outside, cameras flashed and headlines formed, but inside, the battle was one of ideas and ideals. Oprah Winfrey stood at the center of it all, resolute and unbowed, ready to see this fight through to its end. The fifth day of the trial dawned with an air of determination. The courtroom was once again packed, a testament to the growing public fascination with the proceedings. Oprah Winfrey entered with a calm dignity, her expression resolute. Today, she knew, was the day to lay bare the deeper principles that had guided her choices. Judge Judy wasted no time. "Ms. Winfrey," she began, her voice crisp, "you have shown us your evidence and your witnesses, but what of the responsibility that comes with influence? Can you assure this court that your platform has not become a weapon rather than a beacon?" Oprah's gaze was unwavering. "Your Honor," she replied, her voice even, "I understand the power of words. I have always believed that influence should be used to uplift, not to destroy. My platform is not a stage for reckless accusation. It is a space where truths that have long been buried can finally be spoken." She spoke of her decades in broadcasting, of the countless stories she had shared, of the lives she had seen transformed by the light of exposure. Each word she spoke was measured, each sentence imbued with the weight of her conviction. "This case is not about my fame," she continued. "It is about the right of every person to seek justice and to be heard without fear." Judge Judy leaned back, her eyes sharp and appraising. "Words can heal, but they can also wound," she said. "How do you ensure that your words do not cross that line?" Oprah paused, gathering her thoughts. "By grounding them in fact, Your Honor," she said softly. "By listening to those who have been silenced and giving them the dignity of accuracy. By knowing that every word carries the weight of responsibility." As the day wore on, the courtroom was filled with testimony and argument. Witnesses spoke of the impact of Oprah's reporting. Lives changed, wrongs exposed, voices amplified. Even those who had doubted her at first now leaned forward, drawn in by the quiet force of her integrity. When the session ended, the air was thick with a new sense of possibility. Outside, the cameras still waited, but inside something had shifted. This was no longer just a legal battle. It was a testament to the power of truth and the quiet courage of those who refused to be silenced. The sixth day of the trial dawned with a storm of questions swirling in the minds of those who crowded the courthouse steps. Reporters whispered among themselves, legal analysts debated the stakes on morning shows, and the air was electric with speculation. But inside the courtroom, a different sort of electricity crackled, a focused intensity that only the pursuit of truth could create. Oprah Winfrey took her place at the lectern, her notes arranged with meticulous care. She had spent the night preparing, poring over transcripts and legal precedents, knowing that today would test every ounce of her resolve. Judge Judy watched her closely, her expression as enigmatic as ever. "Ms. Winfrey," she began, her tone measured, "you have spoken of truth and justice, but the law requires more than noble ideals. It demands precision. It demands clarity. Can you meet that burden today?" Oprah met her gaze without hesitation. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady, "I understand the gravity of this moment. Every claim I have made is supported by evidence, every word weighed with care. The stories I have shared are not mere anecdotes. They are the lived experiences of those who have suffered in silence for far too long." She presented her case methodically, each piece of evidence a thread in the larger tapestry she was weaving. Reports of safety violations, sworn statements from workers, expert analyses that left no room for doubt. With each exhibit, she built her case brick by brick, a fortress of fact in the face of skepticism. Judge Judy listened intently, her questions sharp but fair. "And what of the reputations that have been called into question?" she asked. "Do you understand the consequences of your words?" Oprah nodded. "I do, Your Honor, but I also understand the consequences of silence. When the powerful are allowed to operate without accountability, it is the vulnerable who pay the price." As the day drew to a close, there was a quiet in the courtroom that spoke volumes. The clash of arguments had given way to something deeper, a recognition of the stakes, a respect for the seriousness of the questions being asked. And in that quiet, Oprah Winfrey stood unwavering, a testament to the power of conviction and the enduring pursuit of justice. The seventh day of the trial began with a sense of gravity that hung over the courtroom like a storm cloud. The air was thick with the weight of what had been said and what was yet to be revealed. For Oprah Winfrey, the stakes had never been clearer. She knew that each word she spoke carried with it the potential to tip the scales of justice. Judge Judy's gaze was steady, her tone clipped. "Ms. Winfrey," she said, "you have given this court much to consider, but today I ask you to look beyond the law. Tell me why you chose to speak when silence might have been easier." Oprah took a breath, her hands resting lightly on the lectern. "Because silence is complicity, Your Honor," she said simply. "I have spent my life listening to the stories of others, stories of struggle, of resilience, of hope. To remain silent in the face of injustice would be to betray all those voices." She spoke of the power of storytelling, of the courage it takes to speak truth to power. Her words carried the weight of her experience, the quiet authority of someone who had spent a lifetime amplifying the voices of the unheard. "This is not just about me," she said. "It is about every person who has ever been told to keep quiet, to sit down, to let things go. I cannot and I will not do that." The courtroom was silent as she spoke, the weight of her words settling over the room like a mantle. Even Judge Judy, who had built her career on skepticism and tough questioning, seemed to pause, her expression thoughtful. As the day's proceedings unfolded, witness after witness came forward to testify to the truth of Oprah's words. Workers spoke of unsafe conditions, of lives forever changed by the failures of those in power. Each story added to the chorus of voices that had once been ignored, but were now finally being heard. When court adjourned, there was a hush in the air, a recognition that something profound was happening within those walls. Outside, the cameras captured only fleeting glimpses of the gravity within. But inside, Oprah Winfrey stood firm, her voice a quiet thunder that refused to be silenced. By the eighth day, the courtroom had become more than just a place of judgment. It had become a crucible of truth. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and paper, the murmur of voices hushed in anticipation. Oprah Winfrey sat at the defense table, her focus unbroken, her resolve sharper than ever. Judge Judy entered with her customary briskness, her robe flowing behind her like a banner of authority. "Ms. Winfrey," she said, her voice carrying the weight of years of experience, "today I expect nothing less than your full candor. The law requires it, and so does the truth." Oprah rose, her movements measured and deliberate. "Your Honor," she began, her voice calm and sure, "I have come here not to hide behind fame, but to stand in the light of truth. Every fact I present, every word I speak, it is for those who have no stage, no microphone, no power." She called to the stand, a former factory supervisor, his voice trembling as he recounted the conditions that had driven him to speak out. The courtroom was silent as he spoke, each word a hammer blow against the fortress of denial that had shielded the powerful for so long. Judge Judy leaned forward, her eyes narrowed. "Do you understand, sir, the risk you take in telling this court what you know?" The witness swallowed hard, then nodded. "I do, Your Honor, but I also understand the risk of silence." Oprah's eyes never wavered as she listened, her expression one of quiet solidarity. She knew the cost of truth, but she also knew its power. As the day wore on, the weight of the testimonies grew heavier, each one a piece of the puzzle that had brought them all here. When the session ended, there was a sense of something momentous taking shape. The courtroom, once skeptical of her presence, now seemed to lean forward, drawn in by the depth of her conviction. Outside, the headlines spoke of scandal and spectacle, but inside, the battle was one of conscience, and in that battle, Oprah Winfrey stood unflinching. On the ninth day, the air in the courtroom felt electric, alive with the knowledge that the end was near. The weeks of testimony had built to this, the final chance for each side to make their case, to shape the narrative that would be remembered long after the verdict was read. Oprah Winfrey took her place at the lectern, her expression calm but her eyes alight with determination. She began her closing argument with quiet authority. "Your Honor," she said, "this case has never been about one person's reputation. It is about the right of every person to be heard, to tell their truth without fear." She spoke of the testimonies they had heard, the voices of workers and advocates and everyday people who had risked everything to speak up. "Their stories are not just evidence," she said, "they are the heartbeat of this case." Judge Judy listened intently, her expression unreadable. "Ms. Winfrey," she said at last, "the law is clear, but the law is also a living thing. It grows, it adapts. Do you believe your words will help it grow in the right direction?" Oprah's voice was soft, but each word rang out with conviction. "I do, Your Honor, because the truth, once spoken, can never be buried again." As she concluded, the courtroom was silent. Even the skeptical faces in the gallery seemed to lean forward, drawn in by the power of her words. In that stillness, there was a sense of something larger than law or fame, a glimpse of the enduring human struggle for dignity and justice. When court adjourned for the day, the crowd outside surged forward, cameras flashing in the fading light. But inside, Oprah Winfrey remained a figure of quiet strength, her head held high, her mission unshaken. The final day of the trial arrived with a hushed reverence that filled the courtroom. The long journey was coming to an end, but for Oprah Winfrey, it was more than a verdict. It was a reckoning. She stood before Judge Judy one last time, her voice steady, her eyes unwavering. "Your Honor," she began, "I have come here not to defend my fame, but to stand for the truth, to show that even the smallest voice has power when it speaks with honesty and courage." Judge Judy listened in silence, her gaze sharp but no longer skeptical. "Ms. Winfrey," she said, "this court has heard your words. Now it will speak." As the judge prepared to deliver her ruling, the courtroom fell into an expectant silence. The air was thick with the weight of weeks of testimony, of countless hours spent building a case not just of law but of principle. And then the decision came. Judge Judy's words were clear, her tone final. "This court finds in favor of the defendant, Ms. Winfrey. Her words, grounded in fact and delivered in good faith, are protected by the First Amendment. The voices she has amplified have found their rightful place in the public record." A murmur rippled through the room, but Oprah remained composed, her head bowed slightly in quiet acknowledgement. Outside, reporters scrambled to break the news, but inside, there was a sense of something deeper, a recognition that truth, once spoken, can never be silenced. As she left the courtroom, Oprah paused at the door, turning back for a moment to look at the room where it had all unfolded. There was no triumph in her expression, only a deep, abiding sense of purpose. She had come not for glory but for justice, and in that quiet victory she had found something far greater than any headline, the enduring power of a voice raised in truth.